Right now, somewhere within 10 feet of you, there is a piece of iron. Your car, your keys, the frame of your bed. You do not think about it, you have never had to. But for over 1 million years of human history, that same metal fell from the sky, and nobody on Earth knew what to do with it. Think about that for a second. Not did not know how to mine it. Not did not care, could not use it. Humans lived for hundreds of thousands of years, surrounded by the single most useful metal in human history, and it sat there, completely off limits, like a locked door with no key. Picture a hunter in the desert 5,000 years ago. He finds a rock. It is heavy, too heavy. It is dark gray, almost black, with strange crisscrossing patterns etched into its surface, like frost on a window. He does not know it yet, but he is holding a piece of a dead star, a meteorite, and when he strikes it against flint, it sparks in a way no stone on Earth ever has. That moment changed everything, but it also created a mystery that would take humans another 3,000 years to solve. Why? Iron is the fourth most common element in the Earth's crust. It is everywhere. Under your feet right now, there is more iron than every other metal combined. So why did humans figure out bronze, made from tin and copper? Two rare metals that have to be mined, refined, and combined in exact ratios. A full 2,000 years before they figured out iron, one of the most abundant materials on the planet. The answer is stranger than you think. And it starts with rocks that came from outer space. Ancient Egyptian, Sumerian, and Hittite peoples all had a word for iron. Translated roughly, it means metal from heaven or black copper from the sky. They were not being poetic. They were being literal. The earliest iron objects humans ever made, dating back to around 3200 BCE, were not mined. They were meteorites, cold, hard chunks of nickel-iron alloy that had survived a fiery drop through the atmosphere and landed in the desert, waiting to be found. In 2016, an Italian researcher named Daniela Camelli ran an X-ray fluorescence scan on a 300-year-old dagger buried with King Tutankhamun. For decades, historians assumed it was a gift forged by some rare early technique. Camelli's scan told a different story. The nickel and cobalt ratios in the blade were an exact match for meteoritic iron, not iron pulled from the ground. Tutankhamun was buried with a knife made from a fallen star. Think about what that means for how rare and valuable this material actually was. This was not some ordinary dagger tucked into a corner of the tomb. It was placed on the young pharaoh's body, wrapped against his mummified torso, positioned like it mattered more than his gold jewelry. In a kingdom that controlled some of the richest gold mines on Earth, the king of Egypt was buried holding a rock from outer space, because in 1323 BCE, sky iron was worth more than anything humans could dig up themselves. Egypt was not alone. Sumerian cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia describe iron using a symbol that combines the words for sky and fire. Across the ancient world, separated by thousands of miles and no communication with each other, cultures independently arrived at the same conclusion: this metal did not belong to the earth. It belonged to the heavens. And if the gods only handed it out once every few centuries, in a random field, in a random desert, then no civilization could ever plan around it. Here is the problem. Meteorites are rare. You cannot build a civilization on rocks that fall from the sky maybe once every few centuries in any given region. If early humans wanted iron tools for real, for farming, for war, for survival, they needed another source. And the ground was full of it. Iron ore sat in reddish-brown deposits across nearly every continent on Earth. The metal that would eventually define entire eras of human history was lying right under their sandals. So why didn't they just dig it up and melt it down? Because iron does not want to be found. Not the way copper does. Copper ore can be smelted at around 1,980 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough that a skilled potter's kiln from 4000 BCE could sometimes get there by accident. Bronze, copper mixed with tin, melts at an even more forgiving temperature. Early metalworkers stumbled into bronze almost by trial and error. Iron is a different beast entirely. Pure iron does not melt until 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. No kiln, no simple fire pit, nothing in the ancient world could reach that heat reliably. For a Bronze Age blacksmith, iron ore looked less like a treasure and more like a rock that stubbornly refused to become anything useful. So for centuries, it sat there, untouched, unwanted, the most abundant metal on Earth, and humans could not use it. Now picture what that meant on the ground, in a real Bronze Age village. A farmer scrapes his bronze hoe against a rocky field and it bends. He curses, straightens it by hand, and keeps working, because a replacement means waiting for a trader to bring tin from a mine hundreds of miles away. A soldier's bronze sword takes a hard hit in battle and folds like a spoon. Bronze was the best technology on Earth, and it still failed people constantly, in ways that cost farms, cost battles, sometimes cost lives. The frustration was not abstract, it was daily, it was personal. And the fix, quite literally, was buried under their feet the entire time. Then, somewhere in the mountains of eastern Anatolia, in what is now modern-day Turkey, something shifted. Archaeometallurgist Vincent Pigot has spent decades studying how ancient smelting technology evolved across the Near East. His research points to a critical breakthrough sometime around 1500 BCE, credited largely to the Hittite civilization. The metal that would eventually define entire eras of human history was lying right under their sandals. So why didn't they just dig it up and melt it down? Because iron does not want to be found. Not the way copper does. Copper ore can be smelted at around 1980 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough that a skilled potter's kiln from 4000 BCE could sometimes get there by accident. Bronze, copper mixed with tin, melts at an even more forgiving temperature. Early metalworkers stumbled into bronze almost by trial and error. Iron is a different beast entirely. Pure iron does not melt until 2800 degrees Fahrenheit. No kiln, no simple fire pit, nothing in the ancient world could reach that heat reliably. For a Bronze Age blacksmith, iron ore looked less like a treasure and more like a rock that stubbornly refused to become anything useful. So for centuries, it sat there, untouched, unwanted, the most abundant metal on Earth, and humans could not use it. Now picture what that meant on the ground, in a real Bronze Age village. A farmer scrapes his bronze hoe against a rocky field and it bends. He curses, straightens it by hand, and keeps working, because a replacement means waiting for a trader to bring tin from a mine hundreds of miles away. A soldier's bronze sword takes a hard hit in battle and folds like a spoon. Bronze was the best technology on Earth, and it still failed people constantly, in ways that cost farms, cost battles, sometimes cost lives. The frustration was not abstract, it was daily, it was personal. And the fix, quite literally, was buried under their feet the entire time. Then, somewhere in the mountains of eastern Anatolia, in what is now modern-day Turkey, something shifted. Archaeometallurgist Vincent Pigot has spent decades studying how ancient smelting technology evolved across the Near East. His research points to a critical breakthrough sometime around 1500 BCE, credited largely to the Hittite civilization. Imagine being a rival king in this era. You hear rumors of a metal harder than bronze, held by a kingdom that will not sell it, will not trade it, will not even confirm it exists in the quantities you have heard whispered about. Your best blacksmiths cannot replicate it because they do not know the process. Your army still marches with bronze, knowing that somewhere north, a rival power is quietly arming itself with something better. That is not a minor inconvenience. That is an existential threat sitting on your border for 300 years straight. For roughly 300 years, the Hittites guarded that secret. And then, almost overnight, everything fell apart. Around 1200 BCE, a wave of catastrophic events swept across the eastern Mediterranean. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. Cities burned. Trade routes that had connected Egypt, Greece, and the Near East for centuries simply vanished. Entire civilizations, including the Hittite Empire itself, crumbled within a generation. Nobody knows the exact cause. Drought, invasion, famine, and internal revolt all likely played a role at once, a perfect storm no single kingdom could survive. But here is the twist nobody expects. The collapse that destroyed the Hittites also destroyed their monopoly. The blacksmiths who once worked in secret, tied to Hittite royal workshops, scattered across the region as refugees. They carried the bloomery technique with them, out of Anatolia, into Cyprus, into the Levant, into Greece. The secret that had been locked behind palace walls for 3 centuries was suddenly loose in the world, with nobody left powerful enough to control it. Picture that moment from the blacksmith's side. His king is dead. His palace is ash. The trade networks that once brought him tin, food, and payment no longer exist. He has one thing left of value, the knowledge in his own hands. And now he is walking, on foot, toward a foreign coastline, carrying the single most dangerous secret in the ancient world, with nobody left to stop him from teaching it to anyone willing to feed him. Bronze depended on tin. Tin had to be imported from as far away as modern-day Afghanistan and Britain, carried along fragile trade networks. When the Bronze Age collapse severed those trade routes, bronze production across the region ground to a halt. Civilizations that had built their entire military and agricultural systems around a metal that could no longer reach them were suddenly desperate. Iron ore, on the other hand, was local. It was everywhere. You did not need a 2,000-mile trade route to get it. You needed a hillside and a furnace. This is the moment the Iron Age actually begins. Not because iron was suddenly easier to work. It still required brutal, repetitive labor, hours of hammering a glowing bloom to force out the slag, then folding and rehammering it dozens of times just to make it strong enough to hold an edge. The Iron Age began because a crisis made a difficult metal necessary. Desperation, not convenience, built the technology that would define the next 3,000 years of human civilization. Archaeologist Erez Ben Yosef, from Tel Aviv University, has spent years excavating copper and iron smelting sites in the Timna Valley, in what is now southern Israel. His excavations reveal something remarkable: evidence that smelting knowledge spread and adapted region by region, often through small, mobile groups of specialized metalworkers, rather than any single centralized empire. Ironworking was not invented once and copied everywhere. It was reinvented, refined, and retaught dozens of times across dozens of cultures, each one solving the same brutal 2,800-degree problem in slightly different ways. That detail matters more than it sounds. It means no single genius cracked the code and handed it down. It means dozens of separate communities, cut off from the trade networks and royal workshops that used to concentrate knowledge in one place, were each forced to rediscover, tweak, and perfect the same grueling process on their own, under pressure, with no guarantee it would work. Some furnaces failed. Some blooms came out too brittle, too full of slag, useless after all that labor. The blacksmiths who succeeded were not just inheriting a secret. They were surviving hundreds of failed attempts by people whose names history never recorded. Within a few generations, the ripple effects reached far beyond weapons and plows. Excavations across Iron Age Europe show iron tools appearing in graves, in trade goods, in everyday households, not just royal armories. A technology that began as a jealously guarded royal secret in a Hittite palace had, within a few centuries, become common enough that an ordinary rural family could own an iron sickle or an iron cooking spit. That is the scale of the shift. A material once worth more than gold became, within 10 or 12 generations, something nearly every household could afford. By 1000 BCE, iron tools had spread from the Near East into Greece, then into Central Europe. Farmers who once worked wooden plows tipped with bronze switched to iron plowshares that could cut through heavier, richer soil, unlocking farmland that bronze tools had never been strong enough to till. Armies who once fought with bronze swords that bent after a few solid strikes now carried iron blades that held their edge through an entire battle. Entire populations grew. Entire wars were won or lost on the strength of a metal that 1,000 years earlier had been dismissed as a useless rock. Consider the Assyrian Empire, which rose to dominate the Near East a few centuries after the Bronze Age collapse. Assyrian armies are remembered by historians as some of the most brutal and effective military forces of the ancient world, and part of that reputation comes down to logistics that bronze could never have supported. Iron ore deposits near their heartland let them equip soldiers by the thousands, not the dozens. A kingdom that once needed a royal monopoly and a foreign trade network just to arm its elite guard could now put a metal weapon in the hands of an ordinary conscript. That shift alone reshaped the balance of power across 3 continents. Think about the scale of what changed. A single Bronze Age society might support one skilled bronze worker for every few hundred people, because tin was too rare and too expensive for anything else. Iron ore was everywhere. Within a few centuries, nearly every village could support its own blacksmith. Tools that had once been the exclusive property of kings and armies became something an ordinary farmer could own, repair, and pass down to his children. And it did not stop at swords and plows. Iron tools transformed carpentry, letting builders shape wood with saws and chisels, sharp enough to hold a straight edge through hours of use. Iron nails replaced fragile wooden pegs in construction. Iron axes felled trees faster than any bronze blade ever could, clearing land for farming at a pace no earlier generation had managed. Every one of these small, unglamorous shifts stacked on top of each other, year after year, until an entire civilization's daily life had quietly been rebuilt around a metal it had ignored for 1,000,000 years. That is the real answer to the question. Ancient humans did not discover iron because they were clever enough to find it. Iron had been sitting under their feet the entire time, for the whole of human history. They discovered how to use it because a civilization collapsed. A monopoly broke, and desperation forced blacksmiths across an entire region to solve the hardest metallurgical problem of the ancient world at the exact same time. Now look back at that piece of iron near you, your car door, your house keys, the steel beams inside the walls around you right now. None of it exists because someone in the ancient world woke up one morning and decided to be brilliant. It exists because a crisis 3,200 years ago made an abundant, stubborn, overlooked material suddenly the only option left. Every skyscraper, every bridge, every surgical scalpel traces its lineage back to a Hittite blacksmith, hammering a glowing lump of slag in the dark, trying to survive the collapse of his entire world. The next time something breaks in your life, a job, a relationship, a plan you had counted on, remember what happened the last time everything fell apart at once. The Bronze Age collapse looked, at the time, like the end of civilization. Cities burned. Trade died. Kingdoms that had stood for centuries vanished within a single generation. But buried inside that collapse was the ingredient for something stronger, something that would outlast bronze, outlast the empires that hoarded it, and end up buried in the walls of a room you are sitting in right now. Somewhere within 10 feet of you, there is a piece of iron, and it is only there because thousands of years ago, everything had to fall apart first.